Hello, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International.
And I'm CJ here. Welcome to our program. Now on tonight's headlines.
Britain became the first Western country to approve a COVID-19 vaccine for general use, announcing a rollout of Pfizer-BioNTech's drug from next week in a historic advance for humanity's fight back against COVID-19.
Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has approved the emergency use authorization for drugs and vaccines against COVID-19.
Hundreds of Indonesians have fled their villages after another rumbling volcano spewed hot ash thousands of meters into the air and belched lava down its crater.
Sri Lanka and southern India battened down the hatches for the second time in a week ahead of the scheduled arrival of another cyclone from the Bay of Bengal.
Britain became the first Western country to approve a COVID-19 vaccine for general use, announcing a rollout of Pfizer-BioNTech's drug from next week in a historic advance for humanity's fight back against the coronavirus. Help is on its way, Health Secretary Matt Hancock tweeted as his department announced emergency use approval by the UK's Independent Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, or MHRA. The NHS, National Health Service, stands ready to start vaccinating early next week, he said, noting the UK is the first country in the world to have a clinically approved vaccine for supply. The Health Ministry also said priority groups to receive the jab will include care home residents, health and care staff, the elderly, and the clinically extremely vulnerable. The breakthrough will encourage hopes the world can finally get back on course in 2021 after a year of traumatic losses, both human and economic. The novel coronavirus has killed nearly 1.5 million people since the outbreak emerged in China 12 months ago, and at least 63 million cases have been registered. Other vaccines expected to come on stream soon include ones from Moderna and AstraZeneca Oxford University.
The United States and Europe on Tuesday fleshed out plans to administer COVID-19 vaccines as soon as they gain approval, with a U.S. panel recommending that the healthcare workers and nursing home residents be given top priority. In the United States, an advisory panel of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention proposed that healthcare workers and nursing home residents, 24 million in total, be the first in line for COVID jabs. Watch this.
So my tally, which I will ask Dr. Cohn to confirm, is 13 in the affirmative and 1 no. Is that correct, Dr. Cohn?
Yes, Dr. Romero, that is correct.
Therefore, the motion passes.
The two priority groups account for around 24 million people, which is the approximate number of people who can be immunized in December or this month if vaccines made by Pfizer and Moderna are approved and the companies deliver the 40 million doses they have promised. Each requires 2 doses, the second dose of the Pfizer vaccine after 3 weeks and Moderna's after 4 weeks. Long-term care facilities have accounted for about 40% of U.S. deaths during the pandemic, or about 100,000 people. There are some 3 million people living in these facilities. For professionals in the health sector, the population is estimated at 21 million people, including workers in hospitals, outpatient clinics, home health care, pharmacies, emergency medical services, and so on.
And staying in the U.S., dozens of people are lining up to get tested for COVID-19 at a temporary testing site in a Queens public library as cases of the coronavirus rise in New York City and Americans return home from the Thanksgiving holiday travel. Let's listen in.
I will take the vaccine when it does come. Not immediately. I want to see what comes of it, if there's any side effects with, there's a bunch of different companies that are putting out vaccines. I want to see, how those, I know they're in trials right now, but once that's done, I want to see, how well the actual public does with it.
It definitely does make me feel hopeful. I think the first round, we'll see what happens, but I think hopefully by summer of next year, everything will be back to normal. I definitely have been getting tested more because more people that I've been in contact with have been getting more positive. So I've definitely been getting tested more. In terms of precautions, I think it's all the same for me. I haven't really been traveling, I haven't been going to people's houses, I've just been going to work and home, wearing masks every day.
Some 70% of the U.S. population of 330 million would need to be inoculated to achieve herd immunity from the virus, a goal the country could achieve by May, according to Dr. Moncef Slaoui, the chief scientific advisor for Operation Warp Speed. Dr. Slaoui said the U.S. Food and Drug Administration would likely grant approval in mid-December for distribution of the vaccine produced by Pfizer and German partner BioNTech, launching the largest inoculation campaign in U.S. history. The FDA's outside advisors are slated to meet on December 10 to review Pfizer's emergency use application for its vaccine, which the company said was found to be 95% effective against infection from the highly contagious respiratory virus.
Ireland Prime Minister announces easing of COVID-19 lockdown restrictions ahead of December holidays. Rowana Bianca Rino from our ABC Ireland Bureau has that story. Rowana.
Ireland announced a staggered easing of coronavirus lockdown restrictions to allow some businesses to reopen and for families to gather. According to measures agreed by the Irish government, all retail outlets, museums, galleries, and libraries will be allowed to reopen under social distancing measures from the 1st of December.
On the 18th of December, these travel restrictions will be eased for a period of 2 weeks until the 6th of January, during which period people can travel outside their county and meet indoors with up to 2 other households. Easing restrictions, we are going as far as we believe it is possible to achieve the best balance of health, economic and social considerations, but no further. The government are satisfied that this combination of new arrangements strikes a safe balance between maintaining the pressure on the disease and creating space for families, friends and loved ones to be together.
Under the Level 3 national restrictions, individuals will also be allowed to go to the gym for individual training and to attend religious services. Further easing will be introduced on the 4th of December, with pubs that serve food and restaurants allowed to reopen. Food must be prepared on-site inside the premises. Over the period from the 18th of December to the 6th of January, the government has said households can mix up to 2 other households and travel between counties will be permitted. From the 7th of January, Ireland has said it will review all measures put in place over the previous months while considering the trajectory of the virus. The government has agreed that face masks should be recommended in crowded workplaces, places of worship, and in busy or crowded outdoor spaces where there is significant congregation. In October, Ireland became the first EU nation to return to a full coronavirus lockdown. While schools remained open, all Irish citizens were told to stay home, with a strict 5-kilometer or 3-mile travel limit for exercise. Martin praised the public's efforts in combating the disease, saying the country had pushed the coronavirus back to the point where we now have the second lowest infection in the European Union. A total of 2,043 people have been killed by coronavirus in the Republic of Ireland from 71,699 confirmed cases. I'm Rowana Bianca Arino, correspondent in the Republic of Ireland, and we live in interesting times.
And in Japan, residents will be given free coronavirus vaccine. Let's get the details from Dennis Liu. Hello, Dennis.
You and to all our televiewers. Yes, Japan will give free coronavirus vaccines to all of its residents under a bill passed Wednesday. The bill, which says the government will cover all vaccine costs for Japan's 126 million residents, was approved by the upper house of parliament, having cleared the powerful lower house. The country has secured COVID-19 vaccines for 60 million people from pharmaceutical giant Pfizer and for a further 25 million people from biotech firm Moderna. In the event that vaccination causes serious side effects, the revised law states the government will cover medical expenses and disability pensions as part of relief measures and shoulder damages on behalf of the vaccine suppliers. It has also confirmed it will receive 120 million doses of AstraZeneca's vaccine. Pfizer and Moderna are already seeking emergency use approval in the United States and Europe, after clinical tests showed their jabs were effective. The Diet also passed a separate bill enabling the government to continue beyond February the quarantining of people who test positive for the novel coronavirus upon their arrival in Japan, extending the measure that was due to expire after a year. In February, Japan decided to hospitalize people who test positive for the virus at airports and ports, and to require those suspected of infection to stay in designated facilities for a certain period. The bill's passage comes 2 weeks after Japan's prime minister said the country was on maximum alert over the virus, and as medics warn hospitals are on the brink of collapse. Japan has seen a comparatively small COVID-19 outbreak overall, with around 2,100 deaths and 150,000 cases, and has not imposed the strict lockdowns seen elsewhere. But it is now facing a third wave of the disease, reporting record numbers of daily infections nationwide in recent weeks. Tokyo's governor has urged residents to avoid non-essential outings and ask businesses serving alcohol to shut early, although there is no enforcement mechanism for these recommendations. The national government has also decided to allow individual regions to opt out of a controversial domestic tourism campaign. That's all for now, Alma. Back to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Dennis, for your updates there in Japan. You stay safe, and we're very interested with the updates coming out of Japan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alma, reporting live from Tokyo, Japan. This is Dennis Liu. We live in interesting times.
Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has approved the emergency use authorization for drugs and vaccines against COVID-19. Duterte signed Executive Order number 121 on December 1st, granting authority to the Director General of the Food and Drug Administration to issue an EUA for COVID-19 drugs and vaccines, subject to several conditions. Outside clinical trials and except in cases where a compassionate special permit is issued, no unregistered COVID-19 drug and vaccine may be manufactured, sold, imported, exported, distributed, or transferred without an EAU, the EO reads. With the newly signed order, a vaccine can be approved for use within 1 month instead of undergoing the usual 6-month review period. FDA Director General Eric Domingo previously assured the public that safety will not be compromised with the sped-up process. He said the FDA and the Department of Health are already working on strengthening the government's vaccine monitoring efforts to easily spot possible adverse effects after inoculation. Vaccine Czar Secretary Carlito Galvez Jr. earlier endorsed the proposal on the EUA for COVID-19 vaccines, saying it will guarantee 30 million to 50 million doses in the country by next year. Last month, President Duterte also approved the recommendation to make advance payments to suppliers of COVID-19 vaccines.
In other news, the Indonesian government has decided to reduce the number of collective leave days for the year-end celebrations, including a substitute for the Idul Fitri leave. The government shortened the break by 3 weekdays, setting only December 24 and 25 and December 31 to January 1 as public holidays, compared with a previously planned 11-day stretch. Now, this comes after a long weekend in October led a spike in confirmed cases. Shortly afterward, Indonesia has reported more than 500,000 COVID-19 cases so far. An association of doctors had urged the government to shorten or even scrap the holiday as health workers struggle to keep up with the caseload.
Now in Vietnam, Prime Minister Nguyen Xuan Phuc has decided to temporarily suspend commercial flights while chairing a meeting on COVID-19 response on Tuesday. The decision was made one day after the Ministry of Health said endorsed the first community infection case of COVID-19, patient numbered 1347, ending a streak of 88 consecutive days without a single local infection. Ho Chi Minh City officials have isolated 513 people after 3 people tested positive for the virus. Prime Minister Phuc directed the Ho Chi Minh City government to quickly trace and isolate everyone who came in contact with those who tested positive this week. Meanwhile, the government said rescue flights will continue to bring citizens stranded abroad due to COVID-19.
And the Center for Disease Control told President Donald Trump's coronavirus task force that the recommended time in quarantine would be 7 days now for those who test negative after exposure to COVID-19, according to people with the knowledge of the matter. And for those who don't take a test, the recommended quarantine is 10 days. At present, CDC guidelines for people who have been exposed is to stay home for 14 days or 2 weeks after your last contact with the person who has COVID-19. The CDC's new guidance was reported earlier Tuesday by the New York Times.
Meanwhile, leading Hong Kong dissident Joshua Wong was jailed alongside 2 other young activists on Wednesday for taking part in last year's huge democracy protests as the crackdown on Beijing's critics gathers pace. Wong was prosecuted alongside close friends and fellow campaigners Ivan Lam and Agnes Chow over a rally outside the police headquarters. It's not the end of the fight, the 24-year-old said on Twitter in a message conveyed by lawyers shortly after his sentencing. We are now joining the battle in prison along with many brave protesters, less visible yet essential in the fight for democracy and freedom for Hong Kong, he said. The trio some of the city's most visible and vocal critics of Beijing's rule pleaded guilty to inciting an unlawful assembly and other charges. The defendants called on protesters to besiege the headquarters and chanted slogans that undermined the police force, Magistrate Wong Zhe-lai said as she handed Wong 13.5 months in jail. Immediate imprisonment is the only appropriate option, according to her. Chow, meanwhile, who turns 24 on Thursday and burst in tears in court, received 10 months. Lam, the 26-year-old son of a former policeman, got 7 months. Chow is being investigated under the security law for allegedly conspiring with foreign forces by pushing for sanctions. Wong is among another group of activists being prosecuted for a vigil marking the anniversary of Beijing's 1989 Tiananmen crackdown earlier this year. Hong Kong was convulsed by 7 straight months of huge and often violent rallies last year in which millions took to the streets. Beijing has refused demands for universal suffrage, and authorities have pursued democracy supporters with criminal cases and a tough new security law.
In Thailand, Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, under pressure from months of street protests, Wednesday survived a legal challenge over his living arrangements that could have seen him thrown out of office. Take a look. The kingdom's 9-member constitutional court ruled that the premier, Prayut, was not guilty of conflict of interest by living in an army residence after leaving the military. The status of General Prayut Chan-o-cha as Prime Minister and Defense Minister remains unchanged, according to the head judge. The court ruled that Prayut's status as Prime Minister entitled him to live in the house even though he stepped down as Army Chief back in 2014. The ruling, though widely expected, is likely to inflame the protest movement that has shaken Thailand since July, calling for Prayut, who came to power in a coup, to quit. As the judgment was read out, pro-democracy protesters started gathering for a fresh rally at a major intersection in northern Bangkok.
A record 235 million people will need humanitarian assistance and protection next year, a near 40% increase on 2020, which is almost entirely from COVID-19, the UN's emergency relief chief said on Tuesday. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged the world to stand with people in their darkest hour of need as the global pandemic continues to worsen. Watch this.
This year, 2020, has been a year like no other. Conflict, climate change and COVID-19 have created the greatest humanitarian challenge since the Second World War. The number of people at risk of starvation has doubled. Hundreds of millions of children are out of school. Levels of extreme poverty have risen for the first time in 22 years. And the humanitarian system again proved its worth in 2020, delivering food, medicines, shelter, education and other essentials to tens of millions of people. But the crisis is far from over. Humanitarian aid budgets face dire shortfalls as the impact of the global pandemic continues to worsen. Today, we launched the 2021 Global Humanitarian Overview, our most comprehensive assessment of humanitarian needs around the world. We must mobilize to support those at greatest risk in these unprecedented times. We need $35 billion to get life-saving aid to 160 million of the most vulnerable people.
U.S. Attorney General William Barr has dealt a fresh blow to President Trump's claim of widespread election fraud. Mr. Barr told the Associated Press that, quote, "To date, we have not seen fraud on a scale that could have effected a different outcome in the election." Barr's interview came as Trump persisted in claiming that fraudulent voting practices and systems in key states such as Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia had robbed him of a second term. In tweets on Tuesday afternoon, President Trump highlighted testimony being offered in a public hearing on the election in Michigan, which has already certified Biden's win in the state, and a separate Republican-organized event in Virginia. People are coming forward like never before. Large truck carrying hundreds of thousands of fraudulent or fake ballots to a voting center. Terrible. Save America, he wrote. Now, he was referring to a press conference in Virginia organized by the Amistad Project, a civil liberties initiative of the Thomas More Society, focusing on claims of irregularities in the November 3 election. Amistad presented 3 witnesses, one of whom had appeared at the Pennsylvania legislature hearing last week, Gregory Stenstrom, and he said he witnessed a Dominion voting systems vendor inserting flash drives into voting aggregation machines in Delaware County, and that election officials mingled various drives from aggregation machines, making auditing of the results problematic. Ethan Pease, a U.S. Postal Service subcontractor from Wisconsin, testified that he was told of plans to backdate tens of thousands of mail-in ballots to circumvent the legal deadline for their submission.
A baby was among 5 people killed when a car tore through a pedestrian shopping street in the southwestern German city of Trier on Tuesday, police said after arresting the driver. Prosecutor Peter Fritzen said the driver, a 51-year-old Trier native, appeared to be suffering from psychiatric problems and had been under the influence of alcohol during the incident in which 14 other people were hurt. Police said they had no indications of a political motive after questioning the suspect, and Fritzen said prosecutors were considering requesting he be placed in psychiatric care. The incident started around 12:50 GMT and ended around 4 minutes of the first emergency calls arriving, with people intercepting the driver after he turned off a main shopping street. Police said he had plowed through the streets for between 600 meters and a kilometer, leaving behind a trail of destruction. Officers sealed off the area and cleared people from the center of the city of about 110,000 people. Chancellor Angela Merkel voiced her great sadness and said her thoughts were with the relatives of those who were so suddenly and violently ripped from their lives, and with the injured, in a message shared by her spokesman.
With all the attention and international efforts focused on the COVID-19 pandemic, the United Nations urged this Tuesday not to put aside the fight against AIDS, a disease that has killed nearly 700,000 people last year and which has 12 million people awaiting life-saving treatment. Let's listen in.
As this report shows, the global HIV response was off track even before the COVID-19 pandemic. But the collision of COVID-19 and HIV has set it back further. 38 million people are living with HIV, with more than 12 million people waiting for life-saving HIV treatment. In 2019, 1.7 million people were newly infected with HIV, and 690,000 people died from AIDS-related illnesses. The targets focus on high coverage of HIV and reproductive and sexual health services, together with the removal of punitive laws and policies, and on reducing stigma and discrimination. These targets address the inequalities on which HIV, COVID-19, and other pandemics thrive and put people at the center, especially the people most at risk and the marginalized, young women and girls.
The new report is named Prevailing Against Pandemics by Putting People at the Center.
Now, in other news, New Zealand's 53rd Parliament formally opens. We have Greg, but there's no Filipinos there. Greg Besa from our EBC New Zealand Bureau has that news. Greg, tell us more.
The New Zealand's 53rd Parliament was officially opened on 25th November, following the general election on 17th October, which resulted to a historic electoral victory of Labour Party, the political party of Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. From this date, it started that new 3-year parliamentary term of elected and listed 120 members of Parliament.
During the opening ceremony on 25th November, which was called Commission Opening, the 120 members of Parliament, both elected and listed, took their oath of allegiance to the sovereign or affirmation of allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth as the head of state in concurrence to legislative requirement. Though reciting the oath of allegiance or affirmation can only be done in English or Maori, the New Zealand indigenous language, other members of Parliament repeated such in 10 other languages which reflected their ethnic origins. Many of them swore their oath on the Bible, while others did it on other written documents they considered important to them. Due to COVID-19 concerns, members of Parliament swore their oaths either individually or in pair. On the same occasion, the Right Honourable Trevor Mallard was re-elected as Speaker of the House of Representatives of New Zealand, who in turn expressed his gratitude to the Prime Minister and his colleagues and was looking forward to enacting priority bills related to COVID-19, housing and economic recovery, among others.
It's an honour and a privilege to be re-elected, and for me it was very special that it was unanimous, that all parties in Parliament were supportive. Having the trust of the Prime Minister is very good, but having the support of the Leader of the Opposition, I think sort of indicates that I've done an even-handed job in the last Parliament. for this Parliament, I think, will be the continuing to deal with COVID, which I think we've dealt with very well as a country, as a team of 5 million, led by the Prime Minister, but the Parliament has been very supportive. I think after that, issues of poverty and housing is where there's going to be a lot of focus. The cost of new houses, the availability of rental houses and state housing. I think there'll be a lot of focus on that.
Having a significant number of gender, ethnic, and indigenous representations, the composition of 53rd Parliament is considered as the most diverse ever in the history of New Zealand's legislative body. However, despite the wide-ranging inclusiveness of the new Parliament, the strong and growing population of Filipino community in New Zealand expressed their frustration and dismay due to non-inclusion of a member of Parliament with Filipino background, unlike the previous Parliament, where Paulo Garcia, the first member of Parliament of Filipino descent, was a part of.
We are, on one hand, very proud that we had 4 Filipino Kiwi candidates running for office. Paulo Garcia, the National Party, Mr. Romy Udana, and Monina Hernandez for the Labour Party, and the new Tea Party fielding Ms. Willa Bernardo. Well, unfortunately, they did not make it. Well, what should we do? How can the Filipino community best assure itself of having our own Member of Parliament in New Zealand? Of course, the embassy cannot lobby for a particular party, let alone a particular candidate. We're very proud that we had Paulo Garcia making history as the first Filipino MP. But what we can say, and what the embassy has been saying, is that we are encouraging Filipino Kiwis to register to vote, and to join a political party according to your convictions and be very active in that party. So some have been saying, the Filipino vote should be very well reflected in having a Filipino candidate. Well, again, I'm very happy that Filipinos have made themselves felt, at least through their support for respective Filipino candidates and for the parties of their choice.
I think it's very disheartening to see that there's no MP of Filipino descent in the upcoming parliament. The House of Representatives is supposed to be a reflection of New Zealand society in general, and without any Filipino representation there, it's lacking because there's no one there to be a voice for the Filipino community in New Zealand. But I think that as long as we Filipinos continue to be vocal about the issues that matter to us and continue to engage with our local MPs, I believe that we can still have the issues that affect us be represented in policy making.
On the other hand, Member of Parliament Honorable Simon Bridges promised to help representing the concerns of the Filipino community in Parliament as he commended the continuing crucial roles of Filipinos in nation building. Other than working with Paulo Garcia during the last Parliament, he also took pride of his 2 visits to the Philippines, recent of which was in January 2019, together with other members of the previous Parliament.
I'm sad that I don't have my friend and colleague Paulo Garcia, but of course I'm back as Member of Parliament for Tauranga. There's a lot to look forward to this term in Parliament. I'm looking forward to working hard for the people of Tauranga. I want to keep my commitment and my friendship with Pinoys around New Zealand and be a good representative in Paulo's absence, helping you along with other national MPs. You are so valued back in New Zealand, the work you do. You provide so much for us, whether it's on our farms, in construction, in the healthcare sector, in IT. And I want to remain a really good friend of the Filipino community throughout this 3-year Parliament.
After the opening ceremony on 25th November, another ceremony called State Opening was held at Parliament the next day. This was attended, along with members of Parliament, by distinguished guests and prominent members from public and private sectors, led by the Governor General of New Zealand. From Parliament grounds, reporting for Eagle News New Zealand Bureau, this is Greg Bessa. We live in interesting times.
Thanks, Greg. Eagle News, we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
This portion is brought to you by RJK Services Manpower Agency Corporation.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Hey there, Arnie Aquino here at Hatley Castle, one of the filming locations for the X-Men series. Don't forget to tune in to Digital Nest only on Net25.
To the U.S., President-elect Joe Biden will keep Donald Trump's trade war tariffs on China for the time being when he moves into the Oval Office next month. Now, rancor and recrimination have defined the relationship between the world's two biggest economies over the last 4 years, with President Trump slapping import fees on billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods with tariffs. Now, Mr. Biden, meanwhile, has been a strident critic of China's human rights record, and analysts have predicted his administration will maintain a hawkish posture towards Beijing. I'm not going to make any immediate moves, and the same applies to the tariffs, Biden told the New York Times in an interview published on Wednesday. He said, I'm not going to prejudice my options. Since winning last month's presidential election, Mr. Biden has hinted at a trade policy that would mend Washington's alliances with Europe and the Asia-Pacific. He has also said the United States must join forces with other world democracies to present a united front in global trade policy as a counterweight to China. Mr. Biden has targeted Beijing on several fronts and singled out Chinese President Xi Jinping during a debate with other presidential candidates in February.
U.S. President-elect Joe Biden has introduced his economic team, saying help is on the way. The president has made a public rollout on the team. He wants advising him on the economy. They come with a new agenda that's intended to make a sharp break with the Trump years. Leading the list nominated to be Treasury Secretary is Janet Yellen, former chair of the Federal Reserve. She called for urgent new action to address the economic damage done by the pandemic. Watch this.
Lost lives, lost jobs, small businesses struggling to stay alive or closed for good. So many people struggling to put food on the table and pay bills and rent. It's an American tragedy.
We're going to get this economy moving again. We're going to create jobs, raise incomes, reduce drug prices, advance racial equity across the economy, and restore the backbone of this country, the middle class. Our message to everybody struggling right now is this: help is on the way.
Now it is my profound honor to help shape those budgets and programs to keep lifting Americans up.
And as we build back better, we must also remain laser focused on the Treasury Department's critical role protecting our national security.
This is a moment of urgency and opportunity, unlike any we've faced in modern times. The urgency of ending a devastating crisis and the opportunity to build a better economy in its wake.
We must build back an economy that's far more resilient, far more fair, and far more inclusive.
Through the organization I co-founded, I've pursued solutions to reverse the dangerous march of inequality and bring us back to the core value of broadly shared success.
Australia has exited its first recession in almost 30 years after official figures on Wednesday showed the economy grew 3.3% in July to September compared with the coronavirus hit previous quarter. With local transmission of COVID-19 largely under control, official data showed businesses have begun to rebound and consumer spending has surged. The Australian Bureau of Statistics said household spending largely drove the economic bounce, rising 7.9% compared with the previous quarter. Treasurer Josh Frydenberg said the figures can give Australians cause for optimism and hope, declaring that Australia has performed better on the health and on the economic fronts than nearly any other country in the world. However, Central Bank Governor Philip Lowe warned that positive economic indicators masked lingering difficulties. Australia's central bank has predicted the economy will not return to pre-pandemic levels until the end of 2021. The economy has yet to fully recover from the coronavirus-fueled recession, recording a 3.8% slump for the year to September.
The Department of Agriculture in the Philippines, through the Agricultural Credit Policy Council, or ACPC, is encouraging returning OFWs to start an agribusiness with the help of the Agribusiness Loan Program, where they can borrow up to 300,000 pesos with zero interest and payable for up to 5 years. As of November 30th, more than 2 million pesos has been lent from 7 approved applications. Watch this.
So kagaya nga po ng nabanggit na ni Yusek Ching, meron po tayong program na ang pangalan din po ng ini-implement ng ACPC, yung agri-negosyo or anyo. Meron po tayong special window para po sa ating mga OFWs, lalo na po yung mga repatriated o yung nakauwi na dala po ng pandemya. At the same time, yung pong mga hindi na po makabalik sa kanilang mga trabaho sa ibang bansa dahil nga po sa travel restrictions or because of the pandemic. So basically po, tayo po ay meron pong pondo na inilaan para sa kanila. Pwede po silang makahiram sa atin up to a maximum of 300,000 para po sa bawat repatriated OFW. ASEC, wala po itong interest. Ito po ay para pong gamitin na lang pangkapital para po sa kanilang production or processing or marketing. Yung mga agri-fishery projects po nila, maari po ito hanggang 18 months na bayaran kung acquisition ng machinery or equipment. Pero kung ito naman po ay gagamitin nila for production processing, ito po ay hanggang 5 taon nilang babayaran. Depende po sa evaluation ng ating tinatawag na mga lending conduits. So, as of November 30, ASEC, meron na po tayong mahigit 2 milyon na napahiram. So far po, 7 OFWs na po yung ating borrowers, pero napakarami po nating mga application forms na i-submit na po natin or na-endorse na po natin sa mga ating mga partner lending conduits para po pag-aralan nila, mag-conduct sila ng credit and background investigation for their approval. So mahigit 2 million na po yung napapahiram natin para dito sa ating mga OFWs under the ANYO program.
Two in three school-age children, 1.3 billion in all, do not have internet access at home, and it's preventing them from learning vital skills they need to thrive, according to the United Nations. The findings, uncovered in a joint report by the UN Children's Fund, or UNICEF, and the International Telecommunications Union, or ITU, also highlighted a similar lack of access for 15 to 24-year-olds, with more than 6 in 10 of them lacking web access. The massive number is more than a digital gap. It is a digital canyon, said Henrietta Fore, UNICEF Executive Director. She also said that this lack of connectivity doesn't just limit children and young people's ability to connect online. It isolates them from work and prevents them from competing in the modern economy. Ms. Fore noted that school closures linked to the coronavirus crisis had made things worse for millions and were effectively costing the next generation their futures. Globally, 58% of school-age children from the wealthiest households have an internet connection at home, compared with only 16% from the poorest, according to the report.
Scientists at the University of Pennsylvania and the biotech firm Regeneron are investigating whether technology developed for gene therapy can be used to make a nasal spray that will prevent infection with the new coronavirus. The idea is to use a weakened virus as a delivery truck to carry genetic instructions to cells within the nose and the throat, which will in turn create powerful antibodies to stop SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 from invading our bodies. James Wilson, a professor of medicine at Penn, who is leading the project, said the advantage of the approach is that you don't need a competent immune system for this to be effective. The technology is currently being tested in animals, and Wilson believes that if successful, it could provide people with around 6 months of protection from a single dose sprayed up the nose, and therefore complement vaccines that could soon be approved. Wilson is a pioneer of gene therapy, delivering genetic code into a patient's cells to correct for defects and treat disease. His research team discovered that the adeno-associated virus, or AAV, group of viruses which infect both humans and other primates but aren't known to cause disease can be engineered to ferry healthy DNA into the cells. This approach led in 2019 to the approval of Zolgensma, the first drug for the treatment of spinal muscular atrophy, and today AAVs are being investigated for dozens of more possible applications. Wilson was contacted by the U.S. government in February to see if he and his lab could use the technology against COVID-19.
And a Chinese space probe on Wednesday began drilling on the surface of the moon hours after landing in an ambitious attempt to bring back the first lunar samples in 4 decades. The Chang'e 5 spacecraft touched down on the near side of the moon on Tuesday and is now gathering samples from the surface, according to the National Space Administration. Chang'e 5's goal is to collect lunar rocks and soil to help scientists learn about the moon's origins, formation, and volcanic activity. If the return journey is successful, China will be the only third country to have retrieved samples from the moon, following the United States and the Soviet Union in the 1960s and the 1970s. This is the first such attempt since the Soviet Union's Luna 24 mission in 1976. China launched its first satellite in 1970, while human spaceflight took decades longer, with Yang Liwei becoming China's first, Taikonaut in 2003. A Chinese lunar rover landed on far side of the moon in January 2019 in a global first that boosted Beijing's aspirations to become a space superpower. The latest probe is among a slew of ambitious targets, which include creating a powerful rocket capable of delivering payloads heavier than those NASA and private rocket firm SpaceX can handle, a lunar base, and a permanently crewed space station. China's taikonauts and scientists have also talked up crewed missions to Mars.
Eagle News, we'll be right back. Please don't go away.
Bank of Commerce. What we are is personal banking, where we understand that every deposit is your hard-earned money. Every loan is for good reason. Every service aids in your convenience. Every business of ours is meant to grow yours. We hear you, feel you, and we act on your every banking need. Bank of Commerce, an affiliate of San Miguel Corporation.
This portion is brought to you by Canreef Corporation, your ventilation and air conditioning specialist. Services offered: supply and installation of elevators, escalators, air conditioners, ventilators, jet towel hand dryers, generators, access control system, factory automation and modernization. For more info, please contact Ami Kanke at 0915-263-7198 or 0998-900-3224.
Sri Lanka and southern India battened down the hatches for the second time in a week on Wednesday after or ahead of the scheduled arrival of another cyclone from the Bay of Bengal. Burevi will pack gusts of up to 100 kilometers or 60 miles an hour when it makes landfall late on Wednesday in Sri Lanka before moving west and hitting India around 24 hours later, according to forecasters. Warning of a storm surge of 1 meter and 20 centimeters of rain in places. Sri Lanka ordered a 3-day closure of schools in the north and east and told fishermen to stay on land. India's National Disaster Response Force said late Tuesday it had deployed 26 teams across the southern states of Tamil Nadu and Kerala. The Indian Meteorological Department issued a red alert in several areas across both states and suspended fishing activities in some areas until Friday. Last Thursday, a more powerful cyclone skirted northern Sri Lanka but hit Tamil Nadu with full force, uprooting trees and delivering 30 centimeters of rain in some areas.
Meanwhile, hundreds of Indonesians have fled their villages after a rumbling volcano spewed hot ash thousands of meters into the air and belched lava down its crater. Take a look.
Pagi sempat ada guguran lava lagi sejauh kurang lebih 2.500 meter.
Semeru on Java Island. Mount Semeru on Java Island spouted a towering column on Tuesday, prompting a call for around 500 people to temporarily evacuate their homes. Footage from the scene showed dead livestock covered by pyroclastic flows, a fast-moving mixture of hot gas and volcanic material as steaming debris flowed into a nearby river. Local disaster agency Chief Agus Triana warned on Wednesday that residents could still be at risk as heavy rains threaten to trigger more volcanic flows from the still spewing crater. The eruption came days after Mount Ili Lewotolok roared back to life on the far eastern end of the archipelago nation. Around 6,000 residents fled to shelters there after the crater ejected a thick tower of debris 4 kilometers into the sky on Sunday, triggering a flight warning and the closure of a local airport.
It was his first contact with another elephant in 8 years. Reaching out with his trunk, Kavan tentatively greeted a fellow inhabitant of the Cambodian sanctuary, where he is beginning his new life after being rescued from grim conditions in a Pakistani zoo. Watch this.
So Kavan is settling in. He's really tired. He's had quite an ordeal the last few days, pretty much the month. A lot of changes for him. Yeah, so he's doing really well. As I said, he's exhausted. He ambles about. He's exploring this first initial grounds for him, and he'll throw dust and sand. He goes to the water, plays with the water, he throws some red mud, he eats, he falls asleep, he just ambling about. And just as I say, it's going to take a bit of time for him to come back to himself. He's been through an ordeal, I know that he likes his space here. Everything's, you can tell immediately. Why? Because the stereotypic behaviors that he's known for, rocking or just standing, leaning his head against a wall, is non-existent. He's curious about everything, he's smelling everything. So I had a bit of time talking to the ladies last night. I haven't seen him today, and the girls during the day, they're often gone into the jungle. So he's here by himself, and they have lots of time at night to talk. Which they did last night. If you see by the water tank, there's a lot of activity there. Clearly some touching of trunks. And
The 36-year-old bull elephant, dubbed the world's loneliest, was the sole Asian elephant at Islamabad's dilapidated zoo. Animal rights groups launched a campaign to save him from the substandard conditions there, boosted by spirited social media support from U.S. actress and musician Cher. He arrived in Cambodia on Monday to much fanfare, including a welcome from Cher herself, who not only traveled to see him off from Pakistan, but also arrived ahead of him at Siem Reap Airport. The plan is to breed Kavan with local elephants to conserve the genetic fold.
And finally, in our news, a giant set of Olympic rings returned to Tokyo's waterfront after maintenance. And tonight, it was lit up at night. It was lit up with officials hoping the symbol will help build enthusiasm for the coronavirus postponed games. Take a look. Promising vaccine trials have boosted Tokyo's hopes of holding the Olympics, now scheduled to open July 23 next year after the pandemic forced the unprecedented decision to delay. Olympic and Japanese officials have said they remain committed to holding the games next year, and International Olympic Committee head Thomas Bach said in Tokyo last month he was very confident that the spectators will be able to attend. The rings will stay in place until the end of the Olympics and will then be replaced by the Paralympic symbol in mid-August.
That elephant. I love elephants. They're my favorite animals. You know, I made a promise. I'm never going to support a zoo or, you know, like a tourist activity where you have elephants tied up. I just love them so much. Nice. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm CJ Hero. Join us again tomorrow.
And I'm Alma Angeles. At the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. And we live in interesting times.